You are officially invited. Yes, you're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 8-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start in the first week of October. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam, F-A-M, to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/fam. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 331. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. Today, I'm sharing a brand new episode in my Fertility Awareness Reality Series. I'm sharing a call with my client, Laura, and we really dive into period pain in a lot of detail. So if you have suffered or are still suffering from period pain, you will definitely want to tune into this episode. And really, part of the reason that I keep talking about period pain on the show, one, is because a pretty significant percentage of all of the women that I work with do suffer from some degree of period pain, be that moderate to severe, somewhere in there. But also, even in this day and age where, in my case, I've been aware that period pain is not normal, though common, though many women experience it, it's not something that is ideal, optimal. It's still apparent to me on a day-to-day basis that the vast majority of women out there, we have really been indoctrinated to believe that it's normal and it's just a part of being a woman. And many of us have had experiences with doctors who either don't take it seriously or are really just kind of shoving it under the rug with medication, pills, or painkillers. And many women have just never had the opportunity to look at it from a different perspective. Like, oh, wow, pain is a sign of an issue. If we look at the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and pain as an indication of an underlying issue, it changes everything. It changes the way that we look at it. It changes our expectation of life, because if your expectation of life is that you shouldn't have to live in pain, then it causes you to continue searching and seeking and learning until you're able to get to the root of that problem and really resolve it, or at least significantly reduce the severity of it. So with that said, let's jump into today's episode with Laura. So I'm really excited to be here today with Laura. Laura is a member of my most recent Fertility Awareness Mastery Live program that just finished last week. So it's always fun when I have a chance to do these calls, particularly like towards the end of the program, because then it's almost like it didn't really finish.
True.
So welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Excited to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to have you. And so we were talking in the pre-chat. I don't have a script for these episodes, but I tend to follow the same style. So I'd love to start by giving you the opportunity to share just a little bit about your menstrual cycle history. I always kind of laugh when I ask this question because there's nowhere else in life that you would start a conversation with tell us about your menstrual cycle history. And so, if you've used birth control before, so I kind of laugh at that, but that's what we talk about here. So yeah, feel free to share as much as you'd like.
Sure. I got my period around 11 or 12. And I actually found out I had gotten my period when I was at a soccer tournament, found myself in a porta potty and had gotten my period.
That's so memorable.
So memorable. And then I had to go to a basketball game afterwards. I think there was just tissue paper involved, and
Wow.
good to grow up, isn't it? So
Memories.
And ever since then, I had cramps that had me lying on the bathroom floor and moaning and always just wanting to be, I was always just really hot and needed to get cold, which is why I think the bathroom floor felt really good. A few years later, I went on birth control for that pain. I don't even remember getting the prescription, just having always been on it. And the interesting part of it was that I never had any side effects of birth control, which made me not question it. I never even knew until I heard your podcast that birth control really had these effects that are long lasting and really harmful for us. I was on birth control and I wasn't even having sex. When I got engaged, I started talking to my fiance about what we were going to use for birth control. And he mentioned, do you think this birth control, these pills you take are safe? And I was like, of course they are. But let me go to my gynecologist and just check in. And he said, birth control is safe. And even women, we were born with a certain amount of eggs, he said. And we want to use birth control because it prevents us from using those eggs, is what he told me. It's best not to waste them. And I even asked him, I was like, thinking about starting a family within the next year. This is still good? And he said, yes, go on the birth control and just end it, and then you can get pregnant the next month. So I felt really confident with birth control. I reported back to my fiance that it was safe and we were good to go. And we ended up using the pill during our first few months of married life. And then the blessing of quarantine, there's always a silver lining, was that I had time to listen to a lot of podcasts, and a friend shared Fertility Friday with me. And I ended up hearing for the first time the dangers of birth control and was just appalled and saddened that it was the first time I was hearing about it, almost 15 years after being on the pill continuously. So I ended the pill in May of this year, so about 4 or 5 months ago. And I'm learning about fertility awareness with you, and I'm learning so much, especially that periods don't have to be painful. So really appreciative of your work.
Wow. So, wow. Thanks for sharing that with us, Laura. I mean, every time I do these episodes, we had 9 weeks together in class. We had 2 in-class sessions. We had 1 private session. And so when I do these interviews is often when I hear like the whole kind of story in a very concise way, because in the class, we're talking about certain things, tons of information, but you basically just took us through like 15 years of your life. So I didn't realize all the aspects of your story. So the few things I didn't realize, I think we did talk about obviously being on the pill for pain related and things like that. But when you mentioned that you didn't have any side effects, and I think that's an important point to me, because of course on the show I highlight a lot of women who've had side effects, because those are the women that are reaching out to me and telling me about their side effects and coming to me when they can't, a lot of women can't use the pill because of the side effects. And so that's why they find fertility awareness. And so obviously, that's going to be represented in who is on the show, because that's who I see. So I think it is really important to highlight stories of women who don't have side effects, or at least don't have any side effects that they're aware of.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. Because I mean, one of the things too is that I've heard, so not in your case, Laura, but I've heard a lot of people talk about, they didn't really know, and they were totally fine on it. But then when they came off of it, they started to notice things. So for some women, it's like their libido comes back, but they didn't really know it was gone, not gone. They just didn't know it was suppressed, maybe. Those types of things can happen. But I think it's really important to highlight the fact that a lot of women take the pill and don't have bad effects that they're aware of. When you said about the bathroom floor, I don't know, that really struck me. because it was like cold and soothing. And I just pictured you on
Yeah.
the bathroom floor and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is like, no one needs to live their life this way, of course, but this is what it is because.
Unfortunately, that's still the story of what I'm dealing with. 2 months ago, I was still on the bathroom floor and my husband was like, come back to bed. And I was like, oh, the bed doesn't seem, I can't move off of this floor. It's weirdly more soothing than the bed right now.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that a little bit too today. There was, yeah, sorry, I'm like going because I made notes, but one of the things that you said as well was that when you spoke to your OB about it, and so this is something that always interests me. So you were kind of curious. Not, I don't even know if you indicated in your story that you were concerned, but you were like curious.
Mm-hmm.
And your partner had brought up like, is it safe? Is it good? Because your partner obviously had a concern for whatever reason. And so you went to your OB and like you made an appointment, like you called, you made an appointment, you attended said appointment, you went because you wanted to know if there were any possible concerns. And the answer was a resounding no. It's actually good for you because, oh, it grades me. If you're not on the pill, it's like you're wasting your eggs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a myth and it's not substantiated by research. If there's somebody listening who is an OB, a practitioner, a scientist, a researcher who actually does like, because I mean, I'm open. If I'm incorrect by saying that there's no research, please show me the research. But when I've done research on this topic, this concept of does the pill preserve your eggs or preserve your fertility because it is suppressing ovulation, so you're not ovulating, and so like if you were like a coin purse, like this makes sense because like you're not like giving away a coin every month, but you're not a coin purse. And so when we look at the research, aging is aging. So
Mm.
the pill doesn't stop you from aging and it
Yeah.
doesn't prevent the natural processes that take place. Like it doesn't prevent women from going to menopause. So it's not like you are on the pill for 20 years and then you end up having menopause at 65 or 75 instead of the average, which would be 55. So, I mean, what are they even talking about? So, just to put that out there, I just wanted to say that that is a myth. And I have yet to see the science that would substantiate that claim that there is that kind of benefit, longevity, saving your eggs benefit of the pill. Like that's not a real thing. So that's frustrating, of course, because you actually took the time to go to the OB. And then you also mentioned that you went again when you were thinking about starting a family. And so this is something that I've spoken about on the podcast before. And certainly I've spoken to a number of women. Again, it's like your intuition is kind of like, I don't know. But you can't really put your finger on it if you don't have the information. So again, called, made an appointment, attended said appointment. So your intuition was strong enough to make you do all those things. And again, nope, it's fine. Just so anyways, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but those were the things that really stood out to me when you were sharing your experience. And I don't know, how do you feel about that now? Like, of course, like the podcast, like, was it red pilled you? Is that is that what the term people say?
I think it's really nerve-wracking that this is a professional and that this information is being disseminated. And I mean, I'm angry for myself, but also just thinking like this disinformation is still being spread. And why is it the case?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, of course, as you know, because you've listened to a couple of episodes, that I've interviewed doctors, and I love interviewing doctors because we need to, like, I feel like ultimately in the grand scheme of things, like when we get past the, like, he said this, she said that kind of thing, we're all on the same team. Like doctors don't go to med school because they want to like screw up people's lives. Like they go to med school because they want to do good for the world and all those types of things. And so I feel like ultimately we are on the same side, but we don't necessarily have the same information. And so understanding where doctors are coming from, the modality that they're trained in, how they're trained to address illness is very, very helpful. And also it's helpful to learn that there are different modalities so that you can match the modality to the type of your paradigm. So if you want to know the underlying cause of the horrific pain that causes you to lay on the floor, then you may want to go to your doctor temporarily, like for the kind of right now, get rid of the pain solution. But then you may also want to look at the other modalities that are addressing the underlying cause and understand that there's a difference between those, right? So, so it's not about like, oh, doctors are this or that, but it's more just about like, what can we do to get better? Ultimately, that's what this is about.
Agreed.
But yeah, so it sounds like the last couple of months have been incredibly revelatory for you.
I can't even explain it. I have just opened up this box about learning about my health for the first time, especially women's health and our reproductive lives and our periods. When I say that I knew nothing before, I really knew nothing before. And I am just so excited by everything that I'm learning.
Yeah, well, that's a lot. Okay, well, let's get into it. So yeah, I think also what struck me about your story was how kind of recent it was as well. The deep dive part of it. Mm-hmm. So I have your chart up here. I was just putting these two together. So this is your recent August-September chart. So you came off of birth control, you said in May. Mm-hmm. And so we're recording this in September. So June, July, August. So basically it's been 3 months. Let me know what's the most important thing for you to talk about today. I do feel like it might make sense for us to talk about your cramps because you were on the bathroom floor and I just keep having this haunting image of you. But let me know what you want us to talk about today.
Great. Looking at this chart, I thought I knew when I ovulated, but I received 2 peak mucuses after I ovulated. So I wanted to check in with you about that.
Okay.
And I also wanted to ask about the time before pregnancy, before conception. You recommend 6 months to 2 years. So just wanted to ask some questions about that as well.
All right, well, let's look at the chart. So I remember when we had our last session, when we were looking at your chart, you had kind of like a thermometer incident.
Yes.
And so we had these really high temps that were uncharacteristic. And so when I see that on a chart, before we jump to like all of the things that could cause your temperature to be way too high, I typically go for the thermometer. And when you did, that made a difference. Mm-hmm. But it was kind of mid-cycle. Yeah. So I feel like your next cycle will be in many ways a little bit more telling. But it did. So based on what I'm seeing here, I think we identified that your peak day, was day 15. Mm-hmm. And then after your peak day, you still had a little bit of like lotiony mucus, but it was significantly different from what we were seeing in the fertile window here. So then I'm seeing here that on day 20, you noted that you had some mucus that was yellow. Was it just yellow or was it yellow and yellow and creamy?
Cloudy, I think.
And cloudy. Mm-hmm. And then and then it was dry. You noted like some yellow, but on day 25, so you noted that it was like wet. So tell me, did you have a lubricative sensation or was it the toilet?
That was a lubricative sensation and that was white.
Okay. So, and could you pick it up?
Yes.
Oh, so it was and did it stretch an inch?
Yes.
Okay. And I have to ask this question. So I noticed that you had sex on day 24 and day 25. So is it possible that it could have been semen from the day before, or was it? So, for example, one of the things that we talked about in the group was after you have sex, to basically get rid of the semen. So go to the bathroom and get rid of the semen. And when you don't do that, then the following day you can sometimes see what looks like possibly mucus, possibly semen, but it makes it kind of hard. Do you think that could have played a factor in what we're seeing on day 25?
I think that you mentioned that you can't pick up and stretch the semen.
Well,
the ejaculatory fluid.
You kind of it doesn't have exactly the same quality, but it can stretch. like that's why it's hard to tell the difference, because it can stretch. It may not stretch as many times or as much because it's not cervical fluid, but it can.
That was my observation was at 11 p.m. the next night. So maybe that's
yeah, that's probably not
a little too long later.
Okay. Well, I just had to ask because
Sure.
I wanted to rule it out.
Yes,
So,
thanks.
oh, no problem. So what I would say, it's not that uncommon to see. So for the listeners who can't see your chart, let me count how many days post-ovulatory. So based on our peak day. So we're 10 days post-ovulatory, just based on our observations on the chart. So it's not that uncommon to see like kind of this random like mucus the one time. I certainly have seen it in the charts. So when that's happening, typically my thought is that it could be a sign that progesterone is a bit low. It could be dropping a little bit sooner in the cycle, and that could be the reason why that little bit of mucus is getting through. So typically that's my thought, because in your case, it's literally just this one random time that you saw it on the one day. So it's not like a consistent pattern. I'm typically not concerned about like the creamy non-peak type mucus post-ovulatory. And again, when you're seeing, I'm not sure how many times you saw it on day 17 or 18. I'm not sure if you just saw it like the one time or a couple times. Have we talked about yellow mucus at all? I think we
have.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, so that's to put it, just to kind of ease the mind. So when you see like and I'm trying to, I feel like I'm like jumping all over my words because I can look at the chart and like I know people are going to be listening to the podcast and they can't see it. But essentially what I'm seeing is, a typical chart. You had your period and then you went into your fertile window, and then it does look like you ovulated because the mucus really did shift. But there are 4 days in the post-ovulatory phase where we do have some mucus. So 2 out of the 4 days are just a little bit of, say, lotiony type mucus with a hint of yellow. There's 1 day where you saw a little bit of mucus that was yellow that was stretchy, or 2 days, a little bit of mucus that was stretchy.
Right.
And so, yeah, so that's for the listener, painting the picture for them. But what I would say is I still, based on your chart, I'm quite confident that you did ovulate. And so this isn't that uncommon. And as I mentioned, especially when you're seeing it kind of towards the end of the cycle, it can just be a sign of either the progesterone dropping and just allowing that little bit of mucus to come through.
Okay. Is there anything I need to take a next step with progesterone?
I mean, certainly it can be helpful I'm sure you're doing a lot of the general kind of progesterone supporting things already. So the foundation is good sleep and all of those types of things. And you could certainly consider doing some magnesium, particularly post-ov, because that's known to support progesterone production.
On this cycle, I started taking magnesium and zinc on day 20 of my cycle.
Okay. And so in general, kind of moving forward, you can take magnesium like throughout. So okay. I always say to focus on magnesium in the post-ov, but you can take magnesium throughout, do Epsom salt baths and all that kind of fun stuff as well. And so I'm certainly guessing that the magnesium and zinc starting day 20 was also related to the pain that you've been experiencing. Was that part of your period pain plan?
It was. I had gotten that idea from you, so I was giving it a first go. But you did mention that you need to give everything a month before you judge it. So does that mean I should do it before my next period for a week as well, before I say it works, it doesn't work?
Well, so when it comes to like your period pain, typically when you start to address it, you would expect to see some relief. So it doesn't mean it's going to go from like 10 to 0 in one cycle. But as you implement these strategies, you would actually, if you're taking it basically you're like for 2 weeks, so your entire post-ovulatory phase, you would expect to see some relief. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens there. But in terms of like your mucus pattern, that's something where I would encourage you to at least one full cycle. So you started at mid-cycle, I would certainly encourage you to kind of think about that in terms of one full cycle to see what's happening in the next cycle before you expect an improvement, really.
Okay, that's great. Do you have a moment to talk a little bit about that spectrum of getting better from period pain? We can't expect that 1 month it's terrible and then 1 month it's wonderful. So what does that look like in terms of seeing improvements?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So there's a lot of different factors, of course, that we have to think about. And so I think when we talked about period pain, because I know we had quite a few women in our class that had period pain. So I know we spent some time talking about it. And I am just going to pull up. I always like to pull things up. So I'm going to pull up my handout. Of course I am. So there's two aspects of it that I think are important. So one is looking at the general lifestyle factors. I'm sure we talked about this because you want to think about what the sources are potentially of inflammation and see what you can do to reduce the inflammation in your life. And then you also want to incorporate some specific kind of anti-inflammatories. So this is essentially like the initial management stages. And then because in your case, it does sound quite severe, like it's a pretty significant problem. So you want to also then consider, if necessary, like depending on where your pain lies, you would want to consider seeking support from, say, an Arvigo therapist. Or I've interviewed, Arvigo therapist Mercier, but doing that abdominal massage, like if it's still quite severe, having an assessment, and if it's really not resolving, obviously then you'd want to be assessed. So just so that you have that kind of in the back of your mind.
Okay.
But the first step is to look at some of the most common causes or sources of inflammation. And the way that you eat and stuff like that, I think that you've eliminated a lot of those things generally. But some of the offenders would include, regular conventional meat that it has the hormones and all that kind of stuff. Dairy, and so I'm not anti-dairy, but you do want to look at regular conventional dairy, A1 dairy. So dairy that has the A1 protein. Is dairy something that I have to look up your information here because I feel like we've talked about this. But yeah, is dairy a thing for you?
I eat Greek yogurt and cheese. Recently, I've been trying to replace that yogurt with kefir. So trying to work on reducing my dairy and want to try a period of time without it.
Mm-hmm. Well, so it can be helpful to actually do like a cycle with no dairy so that it can help you figure out if the dairy is contributing to the pain.
Okay.
It can also be helpful to consider looking at, I think we talked about this, like the quality of the dairy. So if you have access to A2 milk or dairy products, it's becoming more of a thing. You can ask at your health food store. Guernsey or Jersey cows make milk that essentially has a different protein. So a lot of the inflammation and the issues that women have sometimes with dairy isn't like the concept of milk overall, but literally this protein, the A1 protein. So some women actually find that if they switch to goat or sheep dairy, that they have just fewer symptoms. So you could certainly try that also as an option. I know it's like it exploded. So when I go to the health food store downtown, they've got like, I think it's like buffalo dairy and like
right.
sheep and goat dairy. It's like all these different kinds of dairy now. I mean, I get my milk from a farm that comes from Guernsey cows, so it's A2. And so this is not scientific, but I know that it makes a difference for me, like just, not having the conventional. So just to give you some options, because I know a lot of people, when they start getting into this concept, it's like, get rid of all the dairy forever. And so it's not, I'm a dairy lover. So if I can, it won't, some women it won't work for, right? But anyway, so that gives you some options to look into for sure.
Definitely.
And the reason that, I start with dairy is because for a lot of women, if they cut dairy, their pain significantly reduces because dairy can be highly problematic, the A2 dairy.
Lisa, I have always, in the last 2 years or so, I've cut out dairy during the week of my period, and I feel significantly better. not in terms of pain, but just general uncomfortableness. So I wonder if that will really be helpful.
Yeah, I would certainly absolutely try it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of play with what we talked about. And like I said, you might find some great, like everyone doesn't love goat cheese, but people who love goat cheese really love it. Uh, my husband like hates it because he's like, it tastes like goat because it does. It actually tastes like a goat. So if you like that, yay.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. I think goat cheese is great.
Me too.
But anyway, so that's something to consider. And certainly that will give you the answer. And so if you choose to do that type of an experiment, then the charting will be very helpful. And my suggestion would certainly be to consider doing like the one full cycle
Okay.
without it and then adding it in or switching off the regular cheese with goat cheese, etc.
Great. I think I haven't tried it yet, Lisa, because I don't feel that I eat that much dairy, but I can imagine that it doesn't even really matter that inflammation is still present whenever you do eat it.
Yeah, I guess it would depend. I mean, if you're only eating it like once a month, then it probably isn't necessarily, but it really depends.
True.
And also when you cut something out, sometimes it's only then that you realize how much you are consuming.
Ah, good point. Yep. That could be.
Yeah. So we'll see. I think that's a good place to start. So in addition to like just kind of listing some of those main sources of inflammation, so we talked about oils, like the oils that you cook with. I certainly wouldn't recommend like margarine or canola oil or those kind of industrial seed oils. I'm not sure what type of oil you typically cook with.
I have, since I read your book, I have started using those for cooking. And I wanted to check in with you today to say the kettle corn that I buy at the store is made with sunflower oil. So my question to you is not just cooking with these things, but the products we buy also, I imagine, shouldn't be made with these things.
Well, I mean, certainly when you start to become more aware of this, like most things that come from the store, when you go to restaurants and eat food, I mean, yeah, they're using all kinds of oils. So it's not always about like 100% eliminate it all, never eat out, never have kettle corn. Like it doesn't always have to be that way. Certainly if you're making a point of trying something or doing one of like an experiment, certainly you could consider that. For me, typically it's about first of all, becoming aware.
Mm-hmm.
So that before we had that conversation, you probably wouldn't have even given it a thought.
Definitely not.
And so now that you're aware, it's more about reducing. And then as you continue this process, you start to see, because oftentimes, the 80-20 rule applies. So oftentimes there's a few things that are like really significantly contributing, and then there's other things that just make it worse. But there's often like the big rocks, if you will. I wouldn't take it that far. I think you already know from my style that I'm never like 100% or not.
Right.
That's not realistic. But I think what this is what body literacy is about. This is exactly what the whole concept of the fifth vital sign is about. So when you become aware and you start to chart and you start to play around with these ideas, okay, these are sources of inflammation. So other sources, just to throw it out there, in addition to the oils, sugar. So processed sugar, high glycemic carbohydrate. Like, so sugar can certainly contribute to inflammation for sure. 100% can make the pain worse. I think anyone who goes on like a crazy sugar binge, who suffers from period pain is regretting it when their period comes. I'm pretty sure that a lot of women are nodding their heads right now. So just to be aware, and that allows you to decide. Sometimes it's your birthday and you're going to have kettle corn and it's delicious, so enjoy it, right? Sometimes you're going to, and then when you do that, then you might end up being really conscious of your anti-inflammatory approach.
Okay.
So with kind of like the most basic period pain approach is, first of all, identifying and reducing and or eliminating those the things that cause you to be inflamed, the things that worsen that, because women who have period pain, for anyone who hasn't listened to, my period pain episodes, women who struggle with period pain, when they look at them from a scientific perspective, like do a blood draw, we have significantly higher levels of inflammation in our bodies, significantly
Okay.
higher markers of inflammation. So the inflammation, and one of the studies that I looked at and that I quote in the book was women who have moderate to severe period pain had 4 times the level of prostaglandins compared to women who didn't have pain.
Wow.
Prostaglandins are a group of lipids that are necessary to help cause uterine contractions, and that allows us to, remove the blood. It's a part of the normal process of menstruation, and all women have these prostaglandins, but the women who have the pain have higher levels. So you end up having this exaggerated response, which obviously you can feel because it feels horrible, the excessive uterine contractions and things like that. Obviously, that's not the only explanation and factor, but at least it's something we can work on.
Okay.
Okay, so that's like the first part. So hopefully that just little chit chat gave you some ideas of what to kind of play with, which is really good, because then you're dealing with it like we're attacking it on both sides. Like we got you surrounded period pain, you're going down.
Yeah. Love it.
So then we talked about this in class. So you've added some zinc, you've added some magnesium. So certainly when you're charting, it's really helpful. You can specifically incorporate those things in the post-ovulatory phase during the week before your period comes. In addition, there's a few, fish oil. I talk about turmeric and ginger. I mean, just if you're able to incorporate, turmeric is a really powerful anti-inflammatory. And so if you can find a way to incorporate that, on a daily basis, in addition, that's certainly a good option as well. And so then it's like now you have the strategies and now we wait. So your question initially was, what to expect. So you can tell why I wanted to kind of go through this first, because this is not magic. I remember when I was in my 20s and I suffered from ridiculous period pain. I've told the story many times. And I remember I would read these books, and sometimes, this is why the information I share is evidence-based. When I wrote about this, I made sure to, incorporate specific strategies that had research behind them. I've had experience with clients, so I know that they work for the majority of, the clients that I've had, because there's nothing more frustrating than, oh, this great thing works for period pain, and then you do it, and then it doesn't, and then you're just like, it's terrible. So what you can expect, I would say, is I would give like the process of this at least 2 to 3 cycles. But the caveat is that you would expect to see some improvement. I wanted to jump into today's episode to invite you to join us for the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. This 8-week group coaching program is designed to help you unlock the secrets of your menstrual cycle. Fertility Awareness Mastery teaches you everything you need to know about using fertility awareness cycle tracking to achieve your intentions. Whether you're currently trying to get pregnant, avoiding pregnancy, or planning to conceive in the future, we've got you covered. This program goes deep. Get to the root of your period problems, hormone imbalances, fertility challenges, and so much more. Early bird registration is now open, but only for a limited time. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam, F-A-M, to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/fam. Now let's jump back into today's episode.
Okay.
So when you do these things for one full cycle, so like I said, magnesium, something you can take every day, and certainly specifically, making sure to focus on that, week before your period, and kind of doubling down on your supplementation, making sure you're sticking with it. But when you employ this strategy, the vast majority of my clients will see improvement. And so what I usually ask, and so I'll ask you now, because I'm trying to see if I asked you this before, but I don't think I did. Out of 10, so 10 being, or 0 to 10. So 0 being like no pain at all. You're on the beach and everything is grand. 10 being really horrible and you might be vomiting. And I've had people describe it like someone stabbing them. So typically, where's your pain?
Personally, I think it is an 8. And I've heard other women on your podcast tell more horrific tales than I have experienced. So that's why I wouldn't put it any higher
So
out
it's
of respect.
basically a 10 is what you're telling me.
Out of respect for them. But I did not have any period pain on day 2 of my cycle this time. So I wondered if that was a small improvement or if that was just a oncer. So I think I'm seeing improvement, but I just didn't want to jump on it without asking.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that given that you still had a day of terrible, terrible pain, then it's too soon
Okay.
to tell, I would say. It's encouraging though.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hard thing too, because yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say at this point, we'll just know more in the next cycle. But when you kind of take this approach, we went through it in a bit of good detail today. So when you take this approach and you kind of apply these things for the one full cycle, I have not had a client who went from 8 to 0, but I've had many clients who've gone from, like in one cycle is what I'm saying. Let me be clear. I've had clients who have gone from 8 to 0, but it's not one cycle.
Okay.
I'm not a magician. It is not magic, but it is evidence-based, and we are addressing the root of it, which is the inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I have had clients who go from, say, 8 to 5 or 8 to 4, and I have never met a woman who is like unhappy with that.
Right, right. Yep.
Anybody who goes from an 8 to a 5 is thrilled.
Yes. I look
Because
forward to that day.
yeah, because there's a few things. One is that it shows you that it's possible. That's, I think, even the biggest thing. It shows you that it's actually possible.
Right.
And it empowers you because it means that, like, this is not 100% out of my control.
Yeah, the things that you were doing are making
Yeah.
an
So
effort.
that's really empowering, especially because of the majority of women who I've worked with period pain, they've had period pain for years. And so they kind of gave up the idea that anything could help long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to check in. I'll want to see how this all goes so that just because I'm curious. And
Mm-hmm.
if I do one thing during my time on this planet, I'd love to kind of help at least to start even if I can't eradicate period pain, at least like there's more women who know now that it's not just normal and we don't just have to put up with it. So I'm
That's
happy at
huge,
least.
Lisa. How many decades did you save me from just expecting it?
Yeah, like but at the same time, it can take some time, and it's not just always, the road to healing isn't always just in a straight line. It certainly isn't from like 10 out of 10 to 0. And sometimes it's not that simple because the pain can be related to a lot of things. And a lot of women do have endometriosis or other issues that are causing and contributing to the pain. So what I would say is that if you try these strategies that I've shared with you and you don't get, after 2 to 3 cycles, you're not getting the relief that you are looking for, right? Like if it's not really going on a downward trajectory, we could certainly, I'd certainly encourage you to reach out to me so that we can continue working on this. But at some point, you certainly want to seek additional support. So there's nothing wrong with, I'd certainly encourage you at that point to go to your doctor, have an exam. If you want to be checked for endo, it often requires a procedure to actually confirm it.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, even before or during that, I've talked a lot on the podcast about abdominal therapy modalities. And so, a number of women, if there's lesions, if there's issues with alignment and those types of things, I would certainly encourage you to consider that route. Because when you address the uterus, like it's in its physical nature, and you're actually going in there and removing any adhesions and scar tissue, improving alignment and circulation and all of those types of things, that is a specific approach that our Western medical system doesn't consider. So I think the good news out of this is that there are a lot of things that you can do. So even like we talked today about the things you can do in your house, the things you can do on your own. And now you also have these additional tools. And I would say even before, not everyone is like dying to have surgery tomorrow. So there's things that you can do before you get to the point where you would be getting a procedure to verify if you have endometriotic lesions and those types of things.
Sounds good. I just listened to the Laura Bryden 180 podcast for the second time. I'm like, is it dysmenorrhea or is it endometriosis? It needs more time, but definitely worried about the fertility effects of endometriosis, but trying not to get too worried too soon.
Again, it's a challenging area because in the sense that it's almost like we feel like there's no options. Like, what if it was endo? But many women experience a great deal of improvement in terms of their pain and even in terms of their fertility with a combination of what we've talked about, dietary lifestyle changes to reduce the inflammation, to reduce the pain, abdominal therapy modalities to improve circulation, alignment, reduce adhesions, and those types of things. And certainly with this episode, when I release it, I'll list, it's like further listening, because this is the point where you can really empower yourself. And it's really about all the options. So this is a great situation for the boardroom analogy where you can really appreciate that you can benefit from your medical doctor and their expertise. You can benefit from a functional doctor and their expertise in reducing inflammation and dietary approaches that can really help to reduce the pain. Obviously, the work that I do, but you can also benefit from abdominal therapy modalities, Arvigo therapy, and the combination of these things. And to be honest with you, Laura, I feel that how many women could go through all of those approaches kind of systematically and have no improvement?
Okay.
So we'll see. Maybe, I was just going to say, maybe in a year or so, we have to have you back on the show to see how you did.
Yeah, I did find someone who does Mercier therapy close by, and just wondering what you thought of what to try first. Acupuncture, Mercier therapy, is it just you choose, or is there one or the other that is better to start with?
Now, I don't think that there's a wrong answer here, first of all.
Okay.
I'll just say that. I think that you would benefit from either. I would be inclined, so there's certainly going to be people who disagree, obviously, so everyone's inclined, allowed to have their perspective. So I'm just going to share my perspective. So again, there's no wrong answer here, but from my perspective, I would be more inclined to seek the Mercier therapy first.
Okay.
The reasoning behind that would be that if there is something happening with regards to an alignment issue, circulation, adhesions, possible endo, given the degree of your pain and how long you've had it and those types of things, then specifically related to fertility as well. With Mercier, if those issues are at play, then once you go through and do your treatments, when you combine that to everything that we talked about today, that is addressing the problem. They can break up adhesions with, similar to when you have like a knot in your shoulder, like if you go to the massage therapist and they like get it out. So you're really addressing on a physical level these issues, and that could lead to lasting change. And so with acupuncture is extremely effective in reducing pain and certainly is incredibly useful for fertility as well. I've just spoken to a number of clients who, when they stopped going to their acupuncture appointments, the pain doesn't always return, but sometimes it did return. And so that's the reason for my rationale, but both are highly effective in reducing pain and certainly improving fertility.
That helps so much. Thank you.
Yeah, you could tell I was trying to word it so gently because someone's going to be pissed off. Or maybe not, but that's the way I look at it.
You have interviewed lots of smart people who are very passionate about what they do.
Well, yes, absolutely. And I also, as a woman who suffered from period pain too, I feel like if it was that's probably the choice I would make, also just because of the promising results in cases where there's actually fertility challenges too with Mercier and with not just Mercier, with the abdominal therapy modalities.
I'm excited to try it.
Well, I know this episode is going to be really helpful. I always am reminded, even in your case where you discovered all of like the rabbit hole, the red pill, like it's like recently, I'm always reminded that, the vast majority of women have never heard a conversation like this before. So, oh my goodness. Well, Laura, I have got a couple questions for you as we draw to a close. For the woman who is on birth control and has no side effects, or she does, and she is really terrified more so for the getting pregnant before she's ready aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's considering fertility awareness and kind of on the fence. What, if anything, would you want her to know?
I feel very passionately about this now after everything that I've learned from you, that it's really time to learn about your body and to invest the time that fertility awareness takes. I did have one friend who mentioned fertility awareness and the 3 signs that we check for, and it just seemed like, why wouldn't I just take the pill? That seems like a little much for me. But once I started learning more about it and really investing the time, it's something that everyone can do, and it is so worthwhile. So I really recommend getting off the pill and learning about fertility awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such an interesting perspective shift, especially for women who've never had a reason to question it, right? So it's been working great. And why? So I'm not even saying like if it's not broke, don't fix it. But at the same time, there's a lot to know.
There is.
Yeah. And everyone should have the opportunity at least to understand how things work, I think.
I agree.
Well, and another second last question, then I actually remembered something. But second last question for someone who's thinking about jumping into the live class and actually, like going head first, what, if anything, would you want her to know about that?
I think for me, it was really helpful in the way that you can read as much as I have, and I've read a bunch of books the past few months, especially yours, but being able to ask questions from you personally has just been incredibly helpful. And I think I would always just be wondering, am I doing this right? Is this normal? So I think that was the greatest gift as part of the live class.
Oh, thanks, Laura. So what I remembered was at the beginning, you actually asked a question about when you should, like if you're planning to get pregnant. So certainly in the book, I give this my honest answer. So it's kind of like how we talked about temperature in the class. It's like there's the perfect world and then there's what really happens.
Mm-hmm.
So in the perfect world where everything is great and you're forever like 21 years old.
Yes.
And you have all the time. Of course, ideally, you would want, post-pill, I would say a minimum of, in the book, I say 18 months to 2 years. But the reason that I say that is because some women come off the pill, particularly women who were on the pill because they had cycle irregularities and they didn't know when their periods would return.
Mm-hmm.
It's like buying insurance. Because some women, in your case, you came off the pill and your periods came back right away and everything was great. Obviously, you have some challenges that you're working out now, but you actually ovulate and have your periods and that came back fairly quickly. But there's other women for whom it takes longer.
Mm-hmm.
So part of my rationale for that longer duration of time is because of what I know. And so what I know is that some women, it takes them several months to get their first ovulation and period.
Mm-hmm.
And it's horrifyingly, as you can just imagine, when your OB told you that everything was great and you waited until the month before you wanted to start trying and then you don't ovulate for 6 months, that's horrible. So that's part of the rationale. And then also it does take an average of 9 to 12 cycles before everything normalizes. And by everything, I mean mucus patterns, cycle, the length of the cycle itself, kind of going to that average of 29 days most of the time. Also the post-ovulatory phase, so between ovulation and your period, ideally it's 12 to 14 days. And, the first several cycles post-pill, those tend to be shorter, tend to be like, sometimes it's 8 or 9 days or 10 days, and it can take several months before you get a healthy, robust luteal phase. And then there's the general issues. So when in the book, it's like the scary thing I talk about in the book, which is the reduced ovarian reserve parameters. And so it does take an average of about 6 to 7 months post-pill before your ovaries return back to their normal productive selves and your hormone levels are approaching normal levels and all that stuff. So you see that reflected in the charts. Okay, so to answer your question then, there's 2 ways of looking at it. So of course you would want a period of, 6 months, 6 to 12 months, so that you can really replenish nutrients. We talked all about that in the class.
Yes.
But on the other hand, your body will conceive when it's ready. And so there's something to be said for, like, if you do get pregnant and you keep the pregnancy, you don't miscarry, and you carry
Right.
that baby to term, your body was ready and it was supposed to happen. And so I walk a fine line. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
good to be prepared and to have all of this knowledge, but at the same time, you don't want to be beating yourself up if you actually get pregnant and you didn't wait and you're just like, oh my gosh, because if you did get pregnant and you sustain that pregnancy and you bring that pregnancy to term, I mean, it was supposed to happen. Your body was ready. Like and you can still do tons during pregnancy to support your baby and yourself and all those things. So,
Lisa, that was really well said, and I appreciated that. May I ask a quick follow-up question? The period pain, is that my body saying, hey, I'm in distress, not time for a pregnancy, or is it okay to get pregnant while I'm still having the pain?
that's such a good question. I mean, I don't know that I have like the answer, but I feel like period pain is like your body's inflamed and there's something going on. I don't necessarily believe that. Obviously, it's like in the general sense, it's obviously not ideal, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And there's obviously things you can do, but I wouldn't say that that necessarily by itself should be a reason, if that makes sense.
Makes
But
sense.
it could be a sign. So for some women, extreme pain is a sign of endo, and that means that they could have challenges getting
Right.
pregnant. For other women, they have raging endo and they have no pain.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
I remember
Because the
learning about
pain
that
is
in your
related to where
podcast.
it is and what's going on. So there are women who their sign of endo is the fact that they can't get pregnant. And that's basically it.
Wow.
So you can tell whenever I get asked questions, it's like there's no like 100% every time yes or 100% every time no.
Yeah, but thanks for explaining both ways. I think that's the important part.
Yeah. And women with period pain get pregnant and have
Okay.
lovely babies.
Okay.
So there's always hope. Well,
All
this
right.
has been this has been really great, Laura. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This is an optional thing. So I always say, actually, when I invite my clients on the show, I always say that it is a very, like, it's a private conversation that we're having, but it's in a very public way because thousands of people listen to the podcast. Not everybody is comfortable, obviously, sharing, but whenever I'm speaking to clients, these are the episodes that are often their favorite because it's really this is real life. Like this is actually what it looks like when you're trying to incorporate fertility awareness. And these are the actual struggles and challenges of trying to get your cycles back to healthy. So I just so appreciate all of the clients who've jumped in and shared their story for this series that just keeps on going because I love it. So thank you so much.
This series has really helped me, and I wanted to thank the other women who have spoken before me, and I hope that this will help someone as well.
Oh, definitely. Well, thanks so much, Laura.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/331. That episode was powerful. And when I said that I was actually picturing Laura sitting on the bathroom floor or laying on the bathroom floor, I really was. And it really struck me because I've certainly been on the floor many times, particularly in my early 20s, many times because my period pain had left me in such ridiculous dire straits. And I share this story often, but I guess I'll just keep sharing it because when I went into labor with my eldest son, I was in labor all day and I didn't know I was in labor because it was my first baby. So I didn't know what labor was supposed to feel like. And those contractions, I would get a contraction, which now in retrospect, I know it was a contraction. And then maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, I would get another one. So this was obviously like the very early stages of labor, but it was very manageable in those initial stages, right? Like it was a contraction, it would last, but I honestly thought it was Braxton Hicks because I was thinking, this isn't that painful. This is, and my entire abdomen would contract. And so once I got 12 hours later and it really kind of kicked in and those contractions were coming 10 minutes apart, that's when I really started to understand that I was in labor because it was very, very consistent. But my point in sharing this example is, why should women be expected to experience such severe pain as just a part of normal existence, such that it rivals and is worse than, in some cases, early labor. It's completely nonsensical when you think about it like that. When you actually take a moment and think about it kind of out of the context, so out of your experience, and imagine someone else having to go through it. Because as many women as go through this terrible period pain, it's the kind of thing that I wouldn't even wish on my worst enemy. So I'm glad that Laura came on the show. Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing your story and really being an inspiration to all the women who listen, because that's really what this is, sharing real women's stories. These are the struggles that we face in our daily lives. And these are the types of issues that can kind of make or break your quality of life for a significant portion of your life. And it's really, I think sometimes we have to be jolted out of the kind of normalcy of our experience and look at those things in a different way. So really look at that pain out of the context. Okay, so what if your dad experienced that level of pain where he had to be on the floor, or your brother or your cousin or whoever, but a male person in your life, if they had to experience that ridiculous amount of pain to the point that they were laying on the floor for comfort and the floor felt better because it was cold. I mean, this isn't something that we should be normalizing, but of course it has been. So with that said, if you know of anyone in your life who you feel could benefit from this episode, please do share it. The link, once again, is fertilityfriday.com/331. And in that episode, I will also link previous episodes. So if this is the first period pain episode of the podcast you're tuning into, or if you are really interested to learn more and to continue this deep dive, head over to fertilityfriday.com/331, and I'll be sure to link some of the previous period pain episodes, because of course I'll just keep sharing far and wide that though common, it's not normal, it's not optimal. Although a lot of us experience pain, it's possible to overcome it. So when I look back at my 21-year-old self who was on the floor and in significant pain and really, really dependent on Advil, and I'm anti-pain, so do what you need to do not to be in pain, and then gradually work on it. But nowadays, now that I have the tools and the information that I need to really support myself and reduce inflammation, manage all those types of things, it's possible. So I went from ridiculous pain to basically no pain. So my periods now, in case you're curious, typically are at, say, between a 0, 0.5, sometimes it'll go to a 1 out of 10. And of course, it's not a cure, because if I wanted to experience the 8 or 9 pain, I could go right back to consuming all the sugar that I did in my 20s, all the commercial dairy products that were, not the best quality. I could go to all of the things that I used to do back then that were really stroking this inflammatory process. So just to put it into context, I don't know if I've ever mentioned that aspect before, but for me, certainly, if I kind of go off the rails and eat all the cheese from the store, and kind of if I'm on vacation and I don't have access to the farm cheese, the A2 quality, then certainly I'll experience a bit closer to that, like 2 range out of 10, because it's always this process. It's this constant and continuous conversation that you're having with your body when you start looking at the menstrual cycle as a vital sign. So that might be an important point as well, because this then becomes a management of this issue for many women that have struggled with period pain for years and years. But the takeaway is that it's possible to significantly reduce or eliminate your pain. And the first step is educating yourself about the sources of the pain, and also the ways that you can go about, reducing or eliminating it. And so, of course, I'll just mention that there's an entire chapter on period pain and the fifth vital sign. So, you can find out more about that at thefifthvitalsignbook.com, as well as getting the first chapter for free over there. But just in case any of you want those additional resources, scientific studies, it's all cited in the period pain chapter. So I'm going to stop rambling and let you enjoy the rest of your day. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're listening to the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.